So today we're going to be talking about um, strategic plan alignment. And oftentimes, we might put together some sort of direction for our life, something intentional plan, a vision. And we also have that for our business or professional focus. So we're going to be talking about that. There we go. A few things that I want to touch base on for today. Um, I am not trying to impose on you that there should be a priority on your professional or personal or community or whatever your focus is. For the sake of our conversation today, we're going to assume that your personal plan is the priority when we talk about things, because when we start talking about alignment, there could be conflict and you might have to prioritize one over the other. So for today's conversation, we're just going to be talking about assuming that that personal plan is a priority. Also, there's a lot of articles out there that when you talk about aligning, personal and organization, what they're talking about is the organization has a plan and they're trying to get everybody on board with that plan. That's not this conversation. What we're talking about is two separate plans, your personal plan that you came up with to direct your life, and this separate business plan that you're directing your professional focus or business with, and kind of meshing the two of them. If we present something today that you have some insight on or would like to expand on, or at some point I'll probably be asking for some input, feel free to offer that up, because we were all here to learn, including myself. I'm always interested to see people's perspectives on these things. So we're not going to be creating a business plan or a personal strategic plan today during this process. That actually takes usually quite a while, and there's a whole process behind it. But I will share at the end of the presentation a link to the process that I used to develop my own personal strategic plan. And if you have questions on how to build out a business strategic plan, there's a lot of variables in that. And so we might want to take that conversation offline, but just keep that in mind. So this assumes you've developed both of those plans. Anyway, and then hopefully at the end, we're going to have an idea of how you can align those things and, create an opportunity for you to actually implement both of them successfully. So lots of times I brought the word strategic many times, and strategic could mean different things for different people. There's people that instantly think about maybe go to market or competitive advantages. And really, in the context of what I'm talking about, strategic just means this is, like an overarching plan that has intended outcomes. So if we just keep that in mind as far as whenever I bring up strategic, and personal just means it's something that is relevant to your life that falls outside of any sort of professional focus. And when I talk about business, it doesn't mean that you have to own a business or be the leader of a business. It just means that's your business focus. So it could be just, your plan for your professional direction. So with that, and this is where I'm going to ask for some input from the team if anybody has any ideas around this. So when I look at two different plans, and we're going to be comparing them and looking for alignment or conflict between the two different plans, these are the areas that I think of when I go into it. I'm looking at, okay, if there's an aspect of the personal plan or the professional plan that relies on one of these things getting accomplished first. There's a dependency, like, hey, unless I do this thing, I don't have the resources or time or mental bandwidth to do this other thing, right? So usually those timelines, and anybody who's put together a project, a long-term project or a Gantt chart will be familiar with like comparing timelines and dependencies. So we want to be mindful of that. But also there's the daily schedule and allocation that distills those, there's these big milestones, but also distills down into what do you do every day? Because a lot of times plans rely on behavior and what we do on a daily basis, because that's what aggregates or combines into those really big impacts. You know, I have a personally, I have a goal to learn some Spanish, but I find that where I get traction is where I'm, you know, building it into my daily schedule instead of saying, oh, I'm going to do it by this date and cram at that future date or whatever. Also keeping in mind that obviously financial resources play a part into that. Lots of times people have goals in their personal life that are supported by their professional focus or business, because that's where we tend to make money for most people. Also keeping in mind that relationships are very important. Most people's goals and priorities are driven by some type of relationship. And it might even be a relationship with yourself regarding health or commitments that you've made to yourself of something that you want to achieve. But at the core of that is a relationship. And that's important because when framing objectives and defining success and even getting assistance on accomplishing those things, turning to our relationships can be very handy in those people outside of us. Also keeping in mind your health span. I didn't come up with this term, but it's like a term out there that I run into now of like, you know, keeping yourself healthy so that you can accomplish those things. And that could be mentally or physically. You know, I didn't put emotionally on there, but that's, you know, can be a factor as well. So, in fact, I'm making myself a note here, make sure to put it emotionally. And then there's also those things that are outside of your control, those macro trends. You know, we've seen a lot of different macro trends with having to do with politics and the pandemic and environmental impact. There are things that are hard to control that have to be factored in that could affect, you know, even with, you know, a professional shift or into another area or the sale or transfer of your business that might be impacted by an industry trend or the economy or something like that. So keeping those in mind is going to factor into this as well. Is there anything that I didn't touch base on or something that I brought up that we should expand on or that you feel you have a question on? I just want to pause for a second to make sure. Okay, Candace, what you got for us?
Well, I think it just goes along honestly with something that you had mentioned already, but outlining how we learn, so the cognitive process, right?
Okay.
So when you were talking about learning how to speak Spanish, you recognize that learning Spanish is something that has to be done every day in order to build. Not every skill is like that. So focusing on our cognitive processes.
That factors in. Okay, great. I like it. That's awesome. And Valerie.
I think this one is really already spoken, but maybe not explicitly. I know one of the things that I contend with personally a lot is my limited energy budget. So that kind of relates to time and kind of relates to health. But I know that I can make all kinds of plans in the world, and then even if I have enough time, I might run out of steam. That's one of my main issues in life. So uh, it yeah, it's
Yeah.
sort of spoken to here, but maybe not so explicitly, or maybe I'm the only person with that issue.
No,
It's okay.
I think that's a great one, and I like the energy budget factor because yeah, you do spend it, and also just like most budgets, it can vary. I mean, I'm 55, and I feel like my energy budget was probably quite large when I was in my 20s. I think of times where I'd work for like 3 days straight without sleeping, and I'm not sure I'd want to do that right now. So thank you. Crispin, what about yourself?
Well, I just had another response to Valerie, which is like, I think of people points as someone I'm not an extrovert. So if I do a lot of networking, for instance, then I work in a one-on-one situation with clients. So that's one way I measure health span issues. But I raised my hand to mention alignment to values. I'm not sure if that would fall under relationship, people, and groups, but if I don't remind myself of all the big whys and who and why I'm doing my work, then things get out of whack.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very true. In fact, values absolutely factor in. I think that people oftentimes think of values as far as impacting the personal, but there's also organizational values that even if you were looking at your business plan, you might say, hey, this falls outside of the organization's values that you've established as well. But yeah, I like the values alignment. Yeah, great. These are all good notes. I like it. uh, Anybody else before we move on? Okay. All right. So let's jump. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is this isn't what we're going to be talking about. As I said, we're not going to be building a strategic plan, but this is just to highlight something. I'm going to, where's my little pen here? Okay. So right here, there's a whole process for developing a strategic plan, and this is more follows along the lines of the business strategic plan, this process. But right here, where I've circled in red, this goals and action items. So during this process, we have what are some more tangible deliverables to the planning process is these goals and initiatives or action items or whatever you want to call them, the elements of the strategic plan that call for action. Those are the things that we're going to be looking at when we talk about alignment. And again, open to any other perspective on this as far as how we look for alignment and evaluate those things. But if we concentrate on these goals and action, excuse me, initiatives and action items, then what we can do is we can plug those in here. These are down here, all these are actually action items or initiatives, not necessarily goals. I'm going to use initiatives as an example, but you could do this with goals, high level goals, what you're trying to accomplish, or down to specific initiatives or action items. In this case, we're going to talk a little bit more on the initiative level. So what I did here is this is a completely fictitious example. So this isn't myself or somebody that I know or a client. It's just simply like some stuff that I made up as an example of things. And so what we did is we had these areas of alignment up here, which now we've talked about some other areas of alignment that we could put to this. And you could build a spreadsheet or a chart or however you want to do it. But the idea is that you look at these areas of alignment and you put down some notes as it relates to each of these initiatives. So, for example, if we now in the case of this one, for the case of this example, these ones that are kind of grayed out, I considered more personal plans, and the ones that are in the white rows were the business plan ideas. But you can kind of organize it however you want. And then we look at those and see if within each of these columns, we see any sort of conflict or if these things seem to line up. So for example, we might look at this and the target date that we have over here. If we say, okay, I'm going to hand off the CEO role in September of 2028, but I have this goal of hiking the Pacific Crest Trail with my father in 2027, then I have to think of, hey, can I do that? Am I thinking that I'm going to hike the whole thing through in one long leg? In which case, that might be tough if I'm still in the CA role, or do I need to break it up? And that might be one of those decisions of like, hey, I'm not going to be able to hand it off until then. And so we're going to have to do this like a few weeks at a time or something, as we kind of go through it. Or there might be something where, in this example, we're building a vacation home, but I also need to increase profitability of my business. If I'm completing it in 2026 and I'm only hitting my EBITDA goal, and by the end of 2026, does that really cash flow out, or do I have the financial resources for that, which might be over here, like those financial resources. Even time, we talked about those daily schedules. If we say in this example, my professional focus, I need to go travel to a bunch of clients and build those relationships to really solidify them and increase the profitability of the organization. And I'm going to, on the weekends, be managing the project of building my vacation home. Does that do I have time to do all of this stuff? Maybe you're like, wait a second, when am I going to spend time with the family? Like you have presumably maybe the build a vacation home, that the genesis behind it was one of the goals was to have a connection with friends and family. But then you might be sacrificing some of that in the short term. And the idea is that, again, the priority is based on what you think the priority should be, and provide an opportunity to start thinking about a solution. What's the priority? Do I need to adjust this? Do I need to adjust my expectations? Do we need to come up with a different plan? But as long as, this whole exercise is just meant to surface, hey, I have a conflict. I got to highlight this in red and say, we need to revisit it, have a conversation. Does that part of the process make sense to people? Any questions on that? Okay. So anyway, we have all of those things. And then of course, and I wanted that timing and macro trends. And we get into this a lot when you do a SWOT analysis, and you talk about SWOT is strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And threats are oftentimes really tough to kind of wrap your mind around and to think about as something that you can impact, because oftentimes they're some sort of external force. But it's not so much of like, hey, I'm going to change global politics so that this doesn't impact me. It's which I mean, good on you if you can. That's great. I'm not saying you can't, but in this context of this exercise is more of like, hey, let's take a look at, if this does happen, or if we do have a shift, what does that mean to the plan? And let's have some flexibility or contingency in there for that. So these are, when we kind of look at these things, the whole idea is to build an opportunity to think about them, come up with a solution. These are some questions that help me. And again, as we kind of go through these, if you think of a question that helps you through this process, or there's something that you would offer up, or a little bit different perspective on these, please let me know. But in there, it's that chart is essentially surfacing issues. So the whole idea kind of goes to this first question is there misalignment between things? And when I talk about stakeholders, that's anybody that's participating or impacted by this plan or the action item that you have. So that could be like in our example, if when we talked about before, you're saying, okay, hey, I want to build this vacation home. Well, what does that mean for the family? Does that mean that, hey, you're going to have less time with me as I manage this project? Maybe we have to shift our budget a little bit to be able to afford it. You have somebody in your leadership team that you're like, hey, I'm not going to be available on the weekends if there's an emergency, and can you handle things if needed? Like there's all sorts of potential people that might be involved with this or impacts. Then and that's why I say that if you have some issue, then think about that relationship first. That's what helps me. Even if, like I said, it's a relationship with myself, like, hey, I've made this promise to myself about my personal time or personal health. I talked that through with that in mind, as far as how it's going to impact things, because it could be that there's other people that are influencers, and that's an opportunity to, think of who else can help you with this. Because I think the most powerful, I guess, changes that I have in my life is because I took the time to talk to other people about it and to collaborate a little bit and lean on my circle of support. Before we were talking about values, the values alignment, and that's great. If you think about, those values and how they play a part, and does this align? Because it's really easy to get caught up and start thinking about the solution and the mechanics, at least for me. And it's good to kind of pull yourself out and say, hey, does this really align with my personal values and the values of the organization? I'm sorry. And also, and this is the coach part of my personality, is that like I want to be curious and ask why. Like a lot of times, if you think about something, you ask yourself why like 4 or 5 times, and you can get to the root of things. It can be very enlightening to figure out, like why do you think this is misaligned, or why do you think it is aligned, and get to the root of it. And then to the earlier comment about behaviors and those daily routines, if you think about it, yeah, you can make this great plan and put in these milestones and have some fun graphics around it and a slogan, maybe even. But at the end of the day, if you're not prepared to change your daily routine and behaviors, some of these changes can fall flat. And I see that the gym that I go to is very busy Q1, but this summer, like half those people won't be here at the gym. So you know how that goes. Anyway, sorry. Any other questions or perspectives that I didn't touch base on that anybody would like to offer up before we move on? Okay, Valerie, I saw you first.
You may have said this and I missed it at the beginning, but just all your comments here make me jump back to the beginning. What prompts us to even do this analysis in the first place? Do we wait until we see, oh, things are misaligned, I gotta have a come to Jesus and do this process? Or are you thinking, okay, this is something that we do as a matter of course, as part of our, we do our business strategic planning, and then I'm somebody who also does some personal planning. So then I do those and then I do that. You know what I mean? Like how does this weave into the whole cycle of things?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I like that. So I see this that what triggers this, or what initiates this process, as developing one of the plans. Like if you develop a professional or business plan, and you already have a personal plan, or you have a personal plan, you develop the other one, even if it's very informal. Like maybe it's a, you know, a conversation you had one day with your friends or family or life partner or whoever, and said, hey, this is where my life's headed. That could be the plan that you compare to your professional direction. Neither one of them has to be formalized. It's just that if you see that you have both of these things existing, this is a time to compare it. My approach is to, if I have the plan, take a look at it and compare the two at the time. I'm not looking for like a problem to arise or something. I see it as just part of the process. And full transparency, I love process. So so expanding it is not a problem for me. But it could have taken a lot of mental energy to put together one of these plans. Take a break and come back to the plans and compare them as outside of the process of creation. Because we'll talk about this a little bit later, but their plans should be living documents in my mind. So I was just Candace.
I have a question to offer you that I like to use in my own work a lot that helps
Okay.
really kind of like it's more of a positive approach to finding alignment instead of a problem seeking approach. They're both necessary, but sometimes it's nice to lean into something positive. And that question is very simple. What do you love about yourself? Because it brings out a whole lot of like, oh, does this person really love themselves? Is that going to reflect in their business? What do they love about themselves? What can they easily see that is going to be something that they can easily lean into and be like, oh yeah, I remember I love this about myself. Can I like center in that and find the energy to move forward with it? Yeah.
Yeah, I see how that might be a tool when we look at even if we do have something that misaligns and we have to prioritize one or put emphasis on one or the other, that might inform it too. Like if I say, if I have that in the background of like, what do I love about myself, then just like the values, we can kind of like keep that perspective and say, hey, I don't want to lose that. So that's great. I love that. Thank you. And I think that shows a lot of EQ, which I've talked about a little bit in this, but it's this doesn't have to be hard and analytical either. So okay, so some of the things in this, and we've kind of touched base on some of these things, but I want to circle back to when I go into a process, or it's just like designing a process or a position description or even organizational design. Usually you're setting up like, hey, these are the expectations and this is our philosophy or our approach on how we're going to take on this. So these are some things that now that you have a feel for like, the process that we're going through with this, these are some things that help me. And as far as the approach on it, and this is my approach. If one of these things doesn't work for you, that's fine. Or hopefully there's some suggestions, which has been great from everybody here as far as other things to consider. But one of the like the slide before that we were talking about that I showed the process of the business plan formation. At the very end is evaluation. And yeah, you put together this plan and maybe the plan has like a 3 or 5 year horizon, whatever it is. Maybe it's even just 1 year. But there's always an opportunity to kind of revisit it and say, okay, under current circumstances, what I know now, what has changed? Maybe you have some further insight or something has changed and you need to change the plan. that's okay. Be willing to challenge the plan that you put forth, and change that and realize that it can change, and it doesn't mean that you failed at putting together the plan in the first place. That's just the natural evolution. Then also, and I'm sure all of you heard the SMART goal framework. If you're putting out goals within your personal plan or your business or professional plan, having them be SMART goals helps a lot when you get to any sort of alignment or comparison, these exercises that we've talked about today, because the more specific you can be, the more that you can kind of see that there's either a conflict or an alignment around those things. And then also, and this might go back to the values or conversation, or maybe going back to the purpose. We talked about strategic plan, and you may have seen, and again going back to that chart, which I maybe should pull up again, but there's and developing the plan, starting with like those values and purpose, and the North Star essentially of where you're headed. Remember that you can revisit those and say, hey, if I do this, now that I've come up with this plan, I know what I'm going to do and how we're going to make this all happen. Does this align with that North Star, with that, the priority or the purpose that you've agreed on? And if in the context of relationships, if you're doing this with a life partner or a business partner, whomever, do they agree that that's the case? And I think that, even the creation of this plan, if you are putting it together, what I've seen is the more that I collaborate and make it a group process, the more buy-in I get, because it's very unlikely that everything in your professional and personal plan can be successful without some input or resources or assistance from people around you. If you think that, then I'd love to talk later about that, because I'd like to challenge that assumption, because I've not found that. I found that to be the case, that at some level it relies on some sort of outside input. And so if you include people, they tend to help you. You get that buy-in, if that's the term I'm using in this slide. So any questions on this, or items that anybody else would throw in there? Not necessarily. Okay.
I have a thought.
Oh yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
I don't know how relevant this is per se, but when you started talking about other people, I think was it this morning? I think it was this morning I woke up and I was like, yes, wait, no, it was last night. It was like, yes, Matthew, you need to understand that you can't do everything by yourself, and you need to work with other people, and you need to be in community. Like, I had to say that to myself. Right? And because I've been the kind of person that's like, I'll just figure it out myself. I can do it. I can handle it. I'll Google it. I'll YouTube it. And whatever. I'll figure it out, right? And I'm not at that place in my life anymore. But perhaps I wasn't really, and I was just denying something. Anyways, but I guess one of the things that comes up from me in this conversation around like goal setting and planning is that line between knowing what you want to do and then bringing people into that conversation versus letting other people decide what you want, what you think you want to do. And exactly. And so thank you, Candace. And so I'm just curious, like, yeah, I guess that's something that's coming to mind as you talk about the people, like engaging other people in your plans, because your plans are personal, right? It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think there is this when you talk about a personal strategic plan, or let's say even on the business side, you're the founder and leader of that business. You have a pretty big stake in that, that focus, or your professional focus has a lot of impact on your personal life, regardless if you're a business owner or not. It's all very personal things. So you're right. The degree in which you collaborate and involve people, that's going to be a personal preference. And you're right, there is a lot, it's a very good point. There's a wide range there. It could be anything from, hey, this is my plan. I'd like you to review it and take a look and let me know what you think. And is this something that you can get behind, to, hey, I'm putting together the plan and can I bounce ideas off you as I'm putting this together? Or, can I get some input from you, or we can discuss it together and decide. Yeah. But yeah, that's going to vary quite a bit as far as how you put together the plan. And it could be that, we're talking about two separate steps here, where there's A, putting together the plan, and then B, as you put it together, look for this alignment piece. And you could commingle these processes. Like you could say, hey, I'm going to sit down and put together a professional plan and a personal plan and look for alignment all at the same time. That could be your approach. It depends on how your mind works, but presumably this assumes that like you've created these plans separately, and now you're making sure that there's alignment. And that perspective comes mostly from my experience with my practice and clients, that oftentimes they do put these together separately. These are different stakeholders in each of these plans. They put them together separately. And now they're looking for, hey, is there alignment? And do I need to adjust anything? So, but yeah, I think that's a good point, that the level of collaboration that you have, it could be that you have a life coach or a personal coach that that might, you might show it to them and have them challenge your assumptions or verify those for you. So, any other thoughts on that? Okay, so this is something that I want to just touch base on, that I think is important. And I think to Matthew brought up something where he said, hey, I can put together this plan. And the people that, and certainly I'm sure many people in this room, and certainly the 1 Million Cups community that I've ran into, there's a lot of very smart, driven people out there, very capable. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that they can accomplish. And what I see though is these people that are smart and driven and capable, and are making things happen, sometimes they're like charging forward and they jump into the next thing, and which is great from a momentum standpoint. But I think that what we don't always do is celebrate the wins. And I like strategic planning because it has like these defined outcomes, and I can, that's something that I can look at and say, hey, I didn't achieve them, or I need to adjust them, or, it's very definable. But sometimes something unexpected happens. Like you're like, hey, we went into it thinking this, but there was some unintended upside, or I learned something, or I really enjoyed the journey, and maybe we didn't accomplish that one thing, or we did end up running into a conflict that we didn't see, right? To the topic of this conversation. But we worked through it. And so that was a win, so I think that we can all stand to celebrate those wins. And, as we revisit our strategic plans and look for alignment, look for those things that are, have come out of it. You guys are spending time and energy being intentional and taking the time to plan and direct your life, which not everybody does. So I think that's a great thing, and just keep that in mind. So that's everything that I have right now. There is, and I'll drop this in the chat as well, but that's my contact information. If you think of anything else, give me a holler, of course, at any point. That link at the bottom, which I'll put in the chat, is the where you can download the process that I used for my personal strategic plan. It has a bunch